When making a game, you probably aren't too excited about making buttons. You want to make things explode, shoot monsters in the head, drive a car through a shopping mall, and so on. But just about every game needs buttons. And at some point in your game, you might realize, no, you need different buttons. And then even later you realize, no, they all need a different color. And so you end up spending a lot of time making buttons and you're still not driving that car through a shopping mall. So in this video I'm going to show you a quick system that can save you a lot of time when creating your UI. It's designed to be easily adjustable and reusable even across different projects. Also, it's not restricted to just UI elements, you can use it for sprites as well. So you could build a scene and have this system change the color of everything in it while keeping a nice cohesive composition. So let me show you how this works real quick. We have some buttons here. So for example, if I take this button, you can see it's divided into different sprites. And then this Colorizer script can now change those sprites and it does it based on the main color. So if I just change the main color a little bit to like blue, the other elements change with it accordingly. And of course then I can easily tweak different parts of it. So I can just do that. If for some reason I want a green shadow, which obviously I don't want, I want it to be a tiny bit more towards the green than the main color. I might want it to be more saturated and a lot darker, something like this. And if I have a color composition that I like, I can actually do this. I can create a instance of a scriptable object. Let's call this light blue. And then almost like a cartridge, I can drag that in here in the slot. And I hope you know what a cartridge is, like a floppy disk or like a DVD. Let's put it at that. And now I can click here, save. And now that color information is saved in the instance of this scriptable object, and this is an asset. I can actually open this in the Explorer, so I could just take that and drag that into a different project. And now I can take the other button, for example, let's take this one, and now I take the light blue, put it in here and load the colors, and now I have them here. And so this way you can easily change elements of the button. You can just tweak the color. For example, right now, of course, it's loaded and it's just saved in the instance of this script. Meaning I can change stuff now. I can say, no, I actually want this to be a little bit lighter for some reason. That's okay. That's still the original light blue is still saved in the instance of that scriptable object. And if you're confused, you don't even know what a scriptable object is, don't worry, I'm going to explain everything now step by step. The first thing we have to do is we need to make our buttons and we need to have them completely white. Because for example, if I drag in a sprite like yesterday, that's really big, sorry. I painted those iron studies and now I can go in here and of course I can change the color. And if I change to something like green, you see, obviously everything that's dark is going to stay really dark, and this is not a completely saturated green that I want because it was actually gray. So what this does, it's more like an overlay, like it's adding the color. So everything that's completely black is always going to stay black no matter what I do here. But everything that's completely white is going to turn completely into this color, and therefore we leave everything white. So I go in something like Krita, this is open source, but of course you can use any painting program. And I still use color when designing the buttons. As you can see, I kinda suck at making buttons, but the good thing is, since I use this system, I actually spend a lot more time just trying out different designs, redoing them, so I think in the end I can get a lot more mileage in and hopefully improve soon. So anyhow, I still use color when designing them, and then I make an adjustment layer like this one. And all I do here is I set the saturation to 0, removing all color, and the lightness to 100, and now everything is white. And I do it this way instead of painting over with white, because I might have some like gradients, like colors that go from full opacity like slowly to half opacity. And if I do it this way, I can keep that opacity. And then I export everything. And on a little side note, I use this ref box, which I use to select the... So I make a selection, I select this ref box. I know like this is the size of the sprite that I'm going to export, sorry. Because if I go back and change the design, what can sometimes happen is I don't remember how big my selection was for the exported sprite, and then in Unity everything's kind of messed up. And so I just have this ref box and I know that's gonna stay in place. I select that, then I crop the image to that ref box, and then I can just work on that. Just a little tip on the side. So anyhow, make your buttons, make them purely white, and then export them to Unity. Back in Unity, just assemble your button, and keep in mind that when using UI elements, there is no sorting order, but there is no like sprite sorting order as you have here, order in layer. But it simply works, whatever is lower in the hierarchy is going to be rendered on top. So based on how you designed your buttons, you need to like assemble it this way. And then you can turn that into a prefab and add the Colorizer script. So let's take a look at that. The first thing in the Colorizer script is a reference to the main image, and of course I define that whatever is like the color that's showing the biggest image, totally up to you. And then I have a list of images or the other elements. I could of course in theory just say the main image is element 0 of this list or whatever. It's just to keep things a bit more readable. And of course, you could also use sprites here if you use it for just normal game objects and not UI elements. Then we're going to have a field for the main color and a list of vector 3 of color changes. Now, if you're unfamiliar with vector 3, you might think, now vector 3 is like position, direction, but it's not. Vector 3 is really just a collection of 3 float values, and it just happens that position with its x, y and z values is a perfect use case for vector 3, but it is also a really good use case for hue, saturation and value, aka color. And so we just make a list of vector 3s, call it color changes. I call it x10 because that way it's a bit easier to adjust the colors in the inspector. And what we are storing in this vector 3, to be precise, is a hue saturation value adjustment based on the main color. So that way it's a lot easier to change the main color and have everything change accordingly. So the first vector 3 for like the shadow is probably the main color with a little bit more saturation but a lot darker, and maybe just change the hue a tiny bit. So it's always relative to that. Because if we take a look at the color, for example here, I think the easiest way is if you change it here to HSV. That's a lot more intuitive instead of using like red, green and blue. So you have HSV, which stands for hue, saturation and value. And unlike what it shows you here, it's actually, when we use it in script, it's going to be a range from 0 to 1. So 0 hue is going to be red, like 0.5 is going to be this cyan. And of course saturation also goes from 0 to 1, it just shows bigger numbers. And actually that's what we're doing with the X10 too, because it just makes it easier to use this slider. So because if I were to use the original 0 to 1 range, it's just harder to adjust, but I know it goes from 0 to 10, gives me a lot more room. And what I do is I just say like, okay, put it in X10, and then as you can see in a moment, I'm actually going to divide it by 10 before applying it. This list here, that's really just like I'm kind of exploiting, you could say, abusing, whatever you want to call it, the header attribute. I just wanted to have like a nice readable list here in the editor window. So technically those are now all headers for the last field, but I have this list. And the reason for this list is that I might have buttons with different elements. There might be a button that only has like a main color and a shadow, and there might be a button that has like 10 different elements. It has like a sprinkles or whatever, like this tiny highlight there, and I want to adjust it really well. But I want the script to work with everything I do. And so for this case, I just said like, okay, I'm going to define whatever elements, like the images. I say element 0 is always going to be the main highlight. Element 1 is going to be a top highlight, like a second highlight. Main shadow is 2. And if I don't have that, I still make the list, but I just leave it empty. I can actually show you that. For example, this button here uses less elements than this bubbly button. And so you can see in the list of images, element 3, which you can see here is a small shadow, and I don't have that. I just leave it at none. But then I have element 4, I have a frame, which is like this dark thing in the background. And so, okay, I assign the frame image there. And then obviously when I go through the elements and set the color, I just make a null check. See, if it isn't null, I apply the color. So let's go through the set color function. First things first, it's going to ask for a parameter of a new color. And that's just if we want to trigger it from outside. And so what we do is first we save the color we receive in our main color field. That's the one we can also set in the inspector. And then of course we set the color of the main image to that new color. Then we take the color and convert it to HSV. So RGB, that's red, green and blue. That's what the color is actually right here. But we want HSV because that makes it much more intuitive to adjust, because we might say I want it a little bit darker, and then you don't have to figure out, okay, how do I get like an RGB of like 30, 20, 15, the same situation but darker. That's I think you might have to be a genius for that, I don't know. Anyhow, HSV is much more intuitive. And this function asks of course for a main color, and it gives us 3 values out. And by the way, this out float main H, that's been introduced I think in C#7. Traditionally you would do like float main H. You would define the variable first and then say the out value, I want to assign that to this field. But you don't have to do that anymore. You can just do that on the fly, which is pretty cool. So basically we are defining the variable and assigning the out value to it just in one step. So we get the main hue, main saturation and main value of the main color of course. And then we go through the images and set the color. As I mentioned before, we are of course checking if it is null. And we're also making sure that we have a float here for a color change, vector 3, sorry. And then we're going to say the new hue. We're going to say main hue plus the color change and then the X, because remember that's a vector 3 and the X of the vector 3 is the hue, the Y, the saturation, and the Z value is the value. Value meaning light or dark. And so for the new hue, we're going to take the X value of this vector 3. And this is where we divide it by 10, because we are storing the values like 10 times higher, so they can be easily adjusted in the editor. And then we're going to clamp it to a hue range. And let me explain that. The problem is that, actually when you take a look at that, with the hue, like if you take a look at the slider, now the hue is 0, now it's actually 1. Again, keep in mind, I think they're doing the same that I did, they're just multiplying it for those fields, so it's a bit easier. The problem is if you want to go like from the red just a little bit more to the yellow, like on the circle here if you see this slide, Of course, what it does, it jumps. So basically 360, say plus 20, we would get 380, in which case Unity would say 380. I have no idea what color that is. You mean black? And that's what Unity actually does. It's going to turn your color black. What we mean is like, no, just start from the beginning. And of course the same if you're here and you want to go down like 40 points or whatever, then of course start again. And so that's what this function does. If the input, and again it's between 0 and 1 in this case, so if the input is below 0, we're going to divide it by 1, and we're only interested in the rest. So it's like minus 12.2. Okay, the rest is minus 0.2. If it's minus 13.2, the rest is minus 0.2. Then we add 1 to the remainder, and then, so in this case we get 0.8. And of course, if it's bigger, we just divide it by 1 and take the remainder. And then we return that, and that way we make sure it's always in that range. For the other ones, we don't have to do it this weirdly because there is no loop. So the new saturation, we take the saturation of the main image, take the vector 3y value, divide it by 10, and then we're just going to clamp it between 0 and 1. So if you drag it like really dark, it's going to be dark at some point. It's just not gonna get any darker. Again, if you don't clamp it, Unity is gonna get confused and like weird things can happen. And of course we do the same with the value. And before we apply the color to the element that we are looping on, so the image that we are looping on, we're of course going to convert it back to RGB. And for that we just need to pass in the new hue, saturation and value. Below here is a function called onValidate, and that is going to be called whenever anything changes in the inspector. What I do here is I just make sure that the main image is not equal to null, because if you first assign the script to like a button, onValidate is going to be called as well, as you don't even have time to assign the main image and you just get an error. And so I just check, okay, do we have the main image assigned? If so, we're going to say SetColors, and we're just going to pass in main color as the argument, because that's what it's asking for. So this line kind of doesn't make any sense, because we pass in the main color and then we set the main color to the main color. But we might want to call the SetColor from other places as well. You know, there might be a script that manages the colors. For example, in my app, I let the player choose colors. And so I need a system that says, okay, those buttons, they get that color that the player just chose. And so this is asking for a parameter. And so this is really useful, because that means when we are changing the color, for example, I'm here now and I do this, or this, or this. Every time right now, onValidate got caught, and that's why all those colors are changing. If I didn't have that, nothing would happen. I still need to call that method. And so this is also really useful, by the way, if you want to like automatically set names for game objects when you drag things on. It's a pretty handy function. Then, okay, now let's take a look at the save system. The save system is based on a scriptable object. And just like a class, you write your script with your methods and fields and everything. But then when you want to create an instance of that, instead of just dragging it onto like a game object, like we did with the Colorizer script, right? That's an instance of the script Colorizer, and then you can change everything differently. You can't do that with a scripted object. You can't just like take the script color pack. It's gonna say no, it's a scripted object. Instead, what you can do to create an instance, you say right click, create, and this is why it says create asset menu. Now we have this color pack here, and we can say, let's call this maybe red. And there's our instance, and as I showed you before, it is actually a file in our asset. So for every instance I have a file. And yeah, so create asset menu means we can do this right click thing and then choose the name of the script. And so all we have here is the main color field for that. Of course, a list of color changes. And this is some stuff if you want to save it. We don't have to go into that right now. That's really like if you want to serialize a color pack and then assign it to things, that doesn't matter right now. All you need to know is it has a field for main color and a list of vector 3s for our color changes. And when we load the color pack in this function, it's of course going to ask for an instance of the color pack. And we have a field here. So we can also assign it in the editor. So it's going to ask for that parameter, and then it's going to assign this one to the field. And then it's just going to set the main color to whatever we have in the color pack. It's going to do the same with the list. It's just going to copy that list. So make a new list of color changes. It goes through the color pack color changes and just adds every element to that list. And then we call the SetColor function. So that way we loaded a color. And of course to save it, it's basically just the other way around. First we make sure that we have a color pack assigned that it can write to, meaning this field in the editor has something. If not, we're just going to return, meaning this function ends right here. And otherwise we're going to set the color of the color pack to our main color. And then we do, and now what we do, now we make a new list in the color pack, the scriptable object. Start with a blank list, go through the changes we have in our Colorizer script, and just add every element to the scriptable object list. And that way we saved it. And the context menu attribute, that's just so I can right click the script and call that method. There's one tiny problem with this, which is I can't put in parameters. So I can't use it for this one here because it's asking for a color pack. But I can make like a little helper function, call it load color pack in editor, which does not need a parameter. And then I see, do I have a color pack assigned in this public field? And if yes, I call the load color pack function and just pass in the color pack. And just like the other function on top, this line in that case does not make much sense because it's the same. Okay, this is it. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something. And you would do me a big favor by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. And if you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, just leave a comment below. And I will also post the link in the description so you can just download it. And hopefully from now on you're going to spend less time making buttons, or rather less time adjusting your buttons and your colors. Thank you and goodbye.